The Pokemon Mystery Dungeon series is an intriguing combination of both traditional RPG and roguelike gameplay. For Red and Blue Rescue Team games, a duo of composers was selected to carry the torch of the fan-acclaimed Pokemon music. These two were Arata Iiyoshi and Natsuhiro Ishizuna. Not much is known about these two composers, although Iiyoshi did get the chance to work on a subsequent game in the series, Explorers of the Sky. Music developed for the Game Boy Advance is notoriously difficult to get sounding correct. The sound chip for the GBA cannot handle low frequencies or high frequencies. Due to this, the composer had to handle all their instruments in this middle zone, which can lead to clutter if they're not careful. The GBA sound chip is also a bit more compressed than the SNES, which will produce a bit of noise as you'll see in this song, Sky Tower. The song is surprisingly much longer than a typical looping video game track, clocking in at around 3 minutes and 45 seconds before looping. Now the composer does use a few tricks to help him extend the length of time a bit. One of these is the use of repeating sections, specifically section 2B and 3A right next to each other. He often returns to these parts after introducing us to a new section. Sky Tower's arrangement is much like a rondo form in classical music. The second trick he uses is an extended bridge in section 4. Divided into 4 distinct separate subsections, this part allows the song to take a bit of a rest and build a slow crescendo. Since this is a rather big track, it demands an equally large amount of instruments. We technically have all the orchestral instruments on display, although in unusual forms. The strings are divided into 3 parts. The first is a legato string ensemble patch, then a solo violin, and then pizzicato strings. For the percussion, we have the pitched instruments, the music box, and tubular bells. The drum kit itself is constructed simply, containing only open and closed hi-hats, a kick, a snare, and a few other middle hits. After the percussion, we have what makes the GBA have that unique sound to it, the waves. The utilization of waveforms was commonplace back in the NES era, but with the more modern sounds that the GBA could handle, the mixture of the two was never really replicated in any other system since. The song comprises of 3 waves, 2 squares and 1 saw wave. As you'll find in this piece of music, the squares provide a great deal of syncopation, while the saw wave is mainly the bass. To conclude the instruments, a choir is used sparingly throughout, as a pad for the other instruments. The shakuhachi, which is a type of Chinese flute, acts as a lead melody in several sections. Lastly, a brass section patch is used to fill out the background space. Now let's see how exactly the song is constructed. The composer commences the first few sections by introducing new instruments with each new section. Such as the first section 1A, you'll find all the waves, choir, and shakuhachi join in. And then B, the drums really pick up here, and the brass section enters. And then you'll find later on even more are added. Here in this introduction though, the strings slowly swell in. And through use of these volume automation, I made the attack way more slower. The interval here is a rich fifth, which is usual for a pad. The music box accompanies the percussion and complements it here beautifully. Notice the music box is doubled, which the second note is being slightly quieter than the first. This produces a slapback effect, and is often the way composers used to go about making such an effect. The notes it uses forms a B sus4 chord, which feels unresolved. The percussion is by far one of the most active instruments. Here only the closed and open hi-hats are used, playing mostly 16th notes. As a small note, see how the composer leaves a couple open spaces in the hi-hats. This allows the rhythm to become a bit less predictable. Now before moving on, see how I diagram the panning for the drum kit down here, and how each half count changes the panning from 100% to the left to 100% on the right. Now let me play the whole section together. Section 1A removes just the string patch and introduces us to the choir, the shakuhachi, and most importantly the waves. The music box and percussion continues the same as before. The choir sort of takes over the strings, serving as a pad, and the shakuhachi begins a first melody. This melody is not something too complex, only using the notes of the B sus4 chord we've discussed earlier. Let's take a look at the first square wave. Now here, it might look difficult to understand at first, but know that these double notes are just used to produce an echo effect. All the notes here are also found within the B sus4 scale. Where these notes are placed, however, seems to be quite random. In the second square wave and the saw wave, they form an interval of a fifth, and also continue the fifth interval, the same exact notes as the string ensemble. So let me solo those two. This is a nice way to carry over parts of previous sections without using the same instruments. Section 2 is when things really get started in the song. The drums are fully formed, and the second square wave acts as another syncopation beat. In the drums, take note of how I double both the kick and the snare to get a more explosive sound. So that's why you see two of them here. The hi-hat 16th notes still continue, while the open hi-hat here remains an integral part of the overall sound of the percussion. For the second square wave, what's interesting here is that it's echoed by a triplet instead of doubled. Combine this with the first square wave, and then the unique left and right panning of both. And then finally the music box, and you get a very intricate rhythm. Section 2B is perhaps the most recognizable part of the song. The string ensemble comes back and fills in as the lead melody. Note how the notes don't exactly line up with the beats. I'll play the metronome so you can see what I mean. There are also numerous voicings going on to present something new to listen to. It's not just the lead melody being played here. The saw wave breaks out of its one-note pattern here, and does a really nice job of complementing the drums. It's clear that the bass has the dominance over the kick of the drum, a decision the composer made early on in the compositional process. Finally, the brass section serves as a counter-melody to the strings, both accompanying it and playing its own parts when the strings are silent. Now let's play the whole entire section 2 section. Here's another section that is repeated many times during the course of the song. Pizzicato is played in a relatively high register, which is an interesting move by the composer and a nice shift away from the previous section. Again, notice how the pizzicato is doubled for that slapback delay sound, and it uses the B sus4 notes again. The string ensemble moves between its first chord, which is a B minor, to a B6 sus chord, then to a B minor 7th chord, and then back to the B6 sus chord. Notice how it always keeps the common B note throughout all these chord changes. To allow room for all these instruments, the second wave drops off in this section, and then in the next section, it repeats section 2B, the one we just heard before. In this short little section 2C here, a groovy breakdown, thanks to the square waves acting in tandem. The focus lies primarily on the bass and the drums. We also see the first entrance of the tubular bells, which cap off this section nicely and transition us for a repeat of section 3A and 2B as well. This is the bridge section of Sky Tower. Many of the instruments before now perform different functions than they were previously assigned. From the top down, the pizzicato strings are the countermelody to the shakuhachi, and they sort of harken back to the melody they played before back in section 3A. Again, these are double. Notice the similarities between that and the section 3A pizzicato. The hi-hats here are interestingly utilized, acting almost like a shaker that varies in volume. You can see down here that I panned the next two patterns into both the right and left speakers. And lastly, as a transition, the whole drum kit returns with the classic open hi-hat alongside it, of course. The first square wave is exactly the same pattern as before, just modulated to a new key, and the second square wave and the saw wave form a fifth interval between D in the saw wave, the bass, and then A in the second square wave. And this eventually moves up with the chord progression. The choir, on the other hand, creates a minor chord feeling, with the first chord be outlining a D minor, and then the second chord a E over B. These two chords create an unruly feeling that doesn't quite resolve either way. The last instrument, the shakuhachi, utilizes a number of pauses in its melody. This is to prevent listening fatigue from hearing the same instrument for an extended period of time. Also notice the subtle climb as it reaches for higher and higher notes. For section 4B, the full kit returns for the percussion, but we are still firmly rooted in the bridge still. The saw wave, the bass, remains constant, and the shakuhachi uses a previous melody found in section 1A back in the beginning, just in the new key. This is a great example of using earlier material in a new section. The string section takes over for the choir and is a bit more active to suggest a build in the music. A nice small difference between these two variations is that at measure 75, which is right here, it uses an uplifting E chord instead of the C sharp sus4 chord right here. Increased syncopation also increases as a result of the music box and the second square wave. Now let me play the entire section 4A and 4B so you can see how they connect to each other. In section 4C, the song almost goes into a second bridge right after the first bridge. It removes the music box, and the second square wave is made a bit more simpler to make room for the violin solo. It also brings out the pizzicato strings, who play these quick eighth notes off the beat, and the drums are peeled back to only include the hi-hats. Now the bass saw wave and the second square wave really only provide the low end to the song. Section 4D is even more stripped back by removing the consistent percussion, the 16th notes, and replaces them with the shaker-like instrument we've heard before. Notice how the square wave also mirrors the pizzicato strings. And really the only instrument that has remained consistent throughout this entire bridge has been the string ensemble. Perhaps my favorite instrument here is the saw wave, which ascends perfectly up a minor scale. Ascending or descending bass lines have always been one of my favorite tools to use as a composer. I also love the trade-off between the solo violin and the shakuhachi. They don't play on top of each other, otherwise that would be creating too much going on in the music. Now let's listen to the section 4C and 4D. In this last section before the loop, the composer almost replicates section 3A, but adds a few different additions. One of them being the brass section that's played here. It doubles what the string ensemble is doing note for note. And the second is that the saw wave here is played a bit simpler by using eighth notes, mainly played on this D. The percussion is actually removed for a bit of the song here, to add in an extra fill at the end as a transition. So let me play the whole section. Now it's time to play the song in full. Now take note in the introduction how the music box never really resolves in its pattern. Then section 1A, the introduction of new instruments, also in 2B as well. And then in 3A, the next section, how the tubular bells bring something interesting to listen to after the pizzicato strings. And all the way in section 4A, the bridge, how the dominance of the saw wave is present in the entire bridge section. Sections 4C and 4D, the moments of break between the melody and how the composer uses other instruments to fill in that gap. And then finally in section 3B, how the composer removes instruments such as the percussion and the second square wave here to create tension. While it is unfortunate that not much is known about either composer for Pokemon Mystery Dungeon, nor on the ideas behind the music, one thing that is clear is how colorful and diverse the soundtrack is. Both composers, in my ears, successfully synthesized the original Pokemon soundtracks with more modern sounds. Sky Tower, in particular, is an excellent example of this culmination of styles. Even with the limited capabilities of the Game Boy Advance sound chip, Iiyoshi and Ishizuna crafted unique sounds that don't seem held back in any way. I'm surprised at how intricate the percussion was, for example. Thank you for watching and enjoy listening from this analysis. I always love putting together these songs, and I hope I can show you the tips and tricks the great composers of the past have put into their songs. Thanks again and have a breezy day.